"Oh, Eleanor, don't make a scene in front of everyone," Victoria whispered with a sly smile as the room filled with the soft hum of applause from colleagues gathered around the polished conference hall. I paused at the entrance, adjusting the pearl necklace my late husband had given me decades ago, feeling the weight of the moment settle across my shoulders. The banners celebrating my son Daniel's achievements fluttered slightly above the stage, shimmering under the bright LED lights, and I noticed the carefully arranged seating where Victoria had somehow ensured I would be in plain view, framed perfectly for everyone to see. I walked slowly toward my designated chair, my heels clicking gently against the marble floor, each step deliberate, measured. I could feel the curious eyes of the employees on me, the whispers quiet but palpable, a tide of tension in the air as if the room itself was holding its breath. Daniel smiled at the front of the stage, unaware of the subtle trap laid out before me, unaware that the celebration had been twisted into a moment meant to provoke me. The table in front of me was adorned with polished silverware and crisp white linens, every detail immaculate, yet I barely noticed the decor because my mind was attuned to Victoria's movements. She moved with calculated grace, handing out programs and nodding to those around her, her eyes catching mine for a fraction of a second, a spark of satisfaction there that I recognized immediately. I breathed slowly, allowing myself to notice the warmth of the afternoon sunlight filtering through the tall windows, casting a gentle glow on the polished wood floors, and in that light, I reminded myself of my own composure, of the decades spent maintaining dignity through trials much harsher than this. As I took my seat, I unfolded the program quietly, the edges crisp beneath my fingers, and I allowed a soft smile to curve my lips, not in defeat, not in fear, but in controlled awareness of the power I still held within the quiet spaces between words. Around me, conversations drifted, laughter punctuated by the clink of coffee cups and subtle murmurs, but I tuned it all out, focusing instead on the rhythmic beat of my own heart and the steady presence of my own thoughts. This was my stage now as much as it was anyone else's, and I would navigate it without letting the scene dictate my reaction. I glanced at Daniel, whose pride shone genuinely on his face, and a pang of warmth passed through me, tempered by the knowledge that this moment was not meant to harm him, only to test me. I observed Victoria again, her posture perfect, her hands clasped elegantly in front of her, but I saw the micro-expressions, the fleeting tension around her eyes, the imperceptible twitch at the corner of her mouth, all betraying the strain of maintaining control over the narrative she sought to enforce. I straightened my back, adjusted the hem of my dress, and let my gaze sweep over the room with calm authority, acknowledging each presence without submission, and for a moment, the room seemed suspended, the chatter dulled, the air taut with unspoken anticipation. In that quiet awareness, I felt the familiar clarity that came with years of navigating family and corporate intricacies, the understanding that while others may attempt to manipulate, the steadiness of one's own conduct is often the most formidable countermeasure. I folded my hands gently in my lap, letting the soft rustle of my skirt be the only sound I contributed, and watched as the ceremony began, knowing fully that patience and composure would reveal truths far more enduring than any fleeting humiliation Victoria had orchestrated. The ceremony continued, and I remained seated, allowing the flow of the event to carry forward around me while I observed every subtle interaction. The podium gleamed under the overhead lights as awards were announced one by one, and I could hear the polite applause of colleagues and employees, their faces attentive yet curious. Victoria moved among them, her smile unwavering, distributing programs and nodding towards certain tables with a precision that revealed planning far beyond mere etiquette. I caught fragments of whispered conversations, the soft murmur of speculation, and I noted how the eyes of those nearby occasionally flicked toward me, some with confusion, some with empathy, though none dared to comment aloud. I took slow, measured breaths, reminding myself that each detail I observed was information, a way to read the dynamics without becoming ensnared in the performance she orchestrated. The chairs around me felt deliberately aligned, an unspoken spotlight on my presence, and I traced the subtle angles of the room, the way the sunlight reflected off polished surfaces, creating tiny highlights that danced along the tables. I allowed myself a quiet reflection on past achievements, remembering the late nights helping Daniel with reports, the conversations that had guided him through early projects, the careful mentoring and advice I had offered silently, believing in the importance of giving without seeking recognition. A small pang of disappointment surfaced at the thought of this deliberate display of control, but I let it pass, replaced by a calm focus, a mental note of every gesture Victoria made, every slight modification in the room that suggested her intent to unsettle. I could see how her presence influenced others, a ripple effect of subtle tension, and yet, I remained composed, adjusting my posture to project a serene confidence that contrasted sharply with the meticulous scheming surrounding me. The hum of conversation continued, punctuated by laughter that seemed slightly forced, and I used it to gauge the comfort levels of those who were clearly trying to maintain diplomacy in the presence of tension. My fingers rested lightly on the folded program, noting the embossed lettering, the care with which each award certificate had been prepared, all details that underscored the contrast between my quiet composure and the deliberate disruption she attempted. I thought about the ways in which influence is often measured in small acts, in the soft placement of words and gestures, and I recognized the opportunity to counterbalance her maneuvers with subtlety rather than confrontation. I allowed my gaze to move over the room, registering the way colleagues shifted in their seats, the soft clearing of throats, the rustle of programs turning, all while maintaining an inner rhythm of calm observation. Inwardly, I charted potential responses, noting how an unobtrusive smile or a brief, well-timed remark could communicate awareness without escalation. Each movement, each small exchange became a dataset in my mind, mapping the social landscape, understanding how influence and perception could be guided with minimal overt action. As the ceremony moved toward its midpoint, I felt a quiet satisfaction in maintaining control over my own composure, realizing that the presence of others, even as they sought to manipulate the scene, could not diminish the steadiness I cultivated. I continued to watch, to listen, to measure, every sense attuned to the interplay of actions around me, aware that subtlety and patience could accomplish more than immediate reaction. The warmth of the late afternoon sun deepened, casting elongated shadows across the polished floor, and I allowed it to remind me of time's passage, of the enduring strength and patience and observation. Every gesture I noted, every expression I interpreted, added to a growing clarity of the event's social dynamics, and I remained seated, hands folded gracefully, projecting an unshakable presence that could not be diminished by calculated provocations. The hum of the room, the murmurs, the soft applause, all blended into a steady rhythm that I followed internally, keeping my focus sharp, my attention broad, and my demeanor composed, fully aware that observation and restraint were the most effective tools I possessed in a moment designed to unsettle me. As the keynote speaker introduced the next award, the room's focus subtly shifted, and I sensed Victoria positioning herself strategically to draw attention toward me at the most inopportune moment. I adjusted the clasp of my bracelet, feeling its smooth gold surface against my skin, and reminded myself to breathe evenly, letting the rise and fall of my chest dictate my rhythm rather than the calculated motions around me. Daniel smiled at the front, unaware of the undercurrent, his excitement genuine, and I allowed a small nod of pride to accompany my composed stance. I noticed the way Victoria leaned slightly, tilting her head, her lips curling in a practiced expression meant to communicate superiority without words, and I recognized it immediately for the performative control it was. The polished wooden floor reflected the sunlight streaming through the tall office windows, and I let the brightness remind me of clarity, of the decades of discernment that had taught me the value of observing without immediate response. Each gentle murmur of colleagues, the shuffle of programs, the subtle adjustments in posture by those nearby, became pieces of information, quietly informing me of the social landscape Victoria sought to manipulate. I placed my hands neatly in my lap, letting the fabric of my dress fall naturally, maintaining an appearance of calm attention while internally mapping the dynamics of influence at play. There was a delicate tension in the air, an invisible thread connecting each glance, each small movement, and I tracked it carefully, noting how perception could be guided by mere positioning and timing. I reflected briefly on the countless times I had supported Daniel, the quiet evenings spent reviewing his notes, the careful mentoring that had gone unnoticed but had laid the foundation for the successes being celebrated today. A wave of measured satisfaction passed over me as I recognized the opportunity to maintain dignity and influence without confrontation, understanding that restraint and patience would yield a more profound effect than any immediate reaction. I watched Victoria again, noting the subtle micro-expressions, the minute shifts in eye contact, the controlled tension in her shoulders, each detail confirming the precision of her approach. I allowed myself a moment to appreciate the gentle ambient light, the way it highlighted the contours of the room and accentuated the serene expressions of those not directly involved in the undercurrent, creating a natural contrast to the calculated tension she projected. The soft clatter of silverware, the careful unfolding of program materials, the polite, subdued laughter in the background all served as a rhythm to guide my attention, and I aligned myself with it, moving only when necessary, speaking only when called upon, yet remaining fully aware of every nuance around me. I recognize that influence is often exerted in silence, in the subtle calibration of gestures, in the timing of reactions, and I consciously chose my responses to maximize the clarity of my presence while minimizing opportunities for manipulation. As the ceremony progressed, I noted the slight shifts in energy, the way people adjusted their posture, the soft clearing of throats, all signs of the social tension vibrating through the room, and I remained anchored, calm, and deliberate. The warmth of the afternoon sunlight deepened the shadows, and I allowed it to serve as a reminder of perspective and patience, reinforcing my ability to act with foresight and precision. Every glance, every whisper, every imperceptible motion became data to be observed and cataloged, and I maintained a posture of grace and attentiveness, projecting quiet strength. I understood fully that patience and composure were my most effective tools, that by holding my presence steady and measured, the subtle inequities and provocations would become evident to all without my needing to raise my voice or draw unnecessary attention. The rhythm of the room, the soft murmurs, the polite applause, all blended into a background over which I could maintain control of my inner state, knowing that true authority is often conveyed through the steadiness of one's own conduct rather than the force of direct confrontation. I noticed a subtle shift in the room as the next segment of the ceremony began, a gentle tension threading through the applause and murmurs. The sunlight spilling through the tall windows caught the slight sheen on the polished conference tables, highlighting the carefully arranged programs and certificates that marked the achievements being celebrated. I observed how Victoria moved with quiet precision, her gestures smooth and deliberate, each nod and smile seemingly choreographed to draw attention while maintaining an air of sophistication. I adjusted my posture slightly, letting my shoulders relax while my back remained straight, projecting calm composure to the audience of colleagues and employees who were now fully attentive. The murmured conversations around me provided an almost rhythmic backdrop, punctuated by polite laughter, the clink of silverware, and the occasional rustle of programs, all blending into a symphony of ambient detail that I used to map the social currents of the room. My hands rested lightly in my lap, the soft fabric of my dress cool against my skin, a small comfort that reminded me of the years I had spent cultivating patience and discernment. I reflected briefly on the guidance I had given Daniel over the years, the late nights reviewing his notes, the quiet mentorship that had laid the groundwork for his success, and a gentle sense of satisfaction arose within me even as the present moments sought to unsettle. Victoria's presence remained constant, her controlled movements and measured expressions communicating a carefully crafted superiority, yet I could detect the micro-expressions beneath the surface, the imperceptible tension around her eyes, the fraction of a second where her composure faltered, and I cataloged each detail with quiet attention. The air carried a faint warmth from the late afternoon sun, casting long shadows that added depth to the room, and I allowed the contrast of light and shadow to reinforce my awareness, emphasizing the clarity and steadiness I maintained despite the orchestrated attention around me. I noted how colleagues shifted in their seats, how subtle gestures and exchanged glances hinted at unspoken observations, and I understood the social landscape without needing to intervene directly. The gentle hum of conversation, the soft clearing of throats, and the subtle tapping of programs against polished wood became a rhythm I aligned with internally, using it to maintain focus and to calibrate the timing of any potential interventions. I allowed a calm assessment of the situation to unfold in my mind, weighing the ways in which influence was being exerted subtly through positioning, timing, and expression, and I prepared myself to act with precision should the opportunity arise. Every glance, every whisper, and every shift in posture became part of a larger understanding, a careful map of how perception could be guided without overt action. I straightened slightly, letting the light touch of my bracelet remind me of my own history and the strength I drew from it, anchoring my attention and reinforcing my internal composure. The ceremony continued with a seamless flow, each announcement and award adding layers to the narrative of the room. Yet I remained an observer with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to navigating complex social situations. In this space, patience and restraint became my instruments, allowing the unfolding events to reveal truths naturally while I preserved dignity and control. The subtle contrasts between deliberate provocations and genuine recognition became increasingly clear, and I maintained a steady gaze across the room, fully aware that my composed presence alone could influence the perception of those around me. I let the gentle movements of the crowd, the soft laughter, and the ambient sounds guide my awareness, reinforcing the understanding that observation and measured response often carry more power than immediate reaction. As the light continued to shift, elongating the shadows and warming the polished surfaces, I remained seated, a steady presence amid the currents of performance and subtle manipulation, holding a quiet strength that required no overt assertion, knowing that clarity and patience would serve as the most effective counter to any subtle attempts at undermining my position. I felt a quiet shift as the ceremony moved into the portion reserved for formal acknowledgments, and I remained seated with a composed presence, hands resting lightly in my lap, observing each motion around me. The polished podium reflected the soft overhead lighting, casting a warm glow across the neatly arranged rows of chairs and the meticulously set tables adorned with crisp linens and delicate centerpieces. Victoria continued her careful positioning, a subtle tilt of the head, a barely perceptible adjustment of her posture, sending unspoken signals to those near her. I noted each nuance, cataloging her gestures without judgment, recognizing the precise manner in which she sought to manipulate perception. The atmosphere was filled with a gentle hum of conversation, the polite shuffle of programs, and intermittent soft laughter, creating a rhythm that I aligned with internally to maintain focus and awareness. I allowed my gaze to sweep the room slowly, noting the expressions of colleagues and employees, their shifting attention, the moments of hesitation, the quick exchanges of glances, all contributing to an intricate social map that I could read with clarity. I remembered the early days of Daniel's career, the hours spent reviewing proposals, the late nights discussing strategy, the subtle mentorship that had gone unrecognized, and I drew quiet satisfaction from the knowledge that these contributions had laid the foundation for the achievements now being celebrated. Victoria's presence remained prominent, yet I perceived the micro-tremors of effort in her gestures, the tension barely concealed beneath her composed exterior, a delicate reveal of the exertion required to maintain her influence. I shifted my posture subtly, shoulders relaxed but back straight, projecting calm authority while remaining fully attentive to the unfolding dynamics. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows accentuated the textures of the room, the polished wood reflecting small highlights that drew attention to the careful details of the ceremony. I breathed evenly, grounding myself in the present, letting the warmth and the rhythm of the room reinforce my internal composure. Every whispered comment, every subtle shift in position, every fractional glance became data, allowing me to understand the intricate interplay of attention and perception without needing to respond overtly. I reflected on the value of patience, on the quiet power inherent in observation, on the understanding that composure itself can redirect influence without confrontation. The ceremony progressed with measured steps, each award, each recognition, adding layers to the narrative of the room, yet I maintained my position as a steady presence, fully aware of the currents of intention around me. I observed how the audience adjusted their posture, how subtle social cues indicated recognition of the underlying tension, and I allowed these observations to reinforce my strategy of silent attentiveness. The polished floors reflected elongated shadows as the afternoon deepened, and I let the visual contrasts remind me of the interplay between light and perspective, the enduring effect of restraint and clarity. My hands remained folded, my fingers tracing the texture of my dress subtly, an anchor to maintain poise, and I continued to catalog the subtleties around me, aware that influence is often conveyed through quiet presence rather than overt action. The gentle cadence of conversation, the polite acknowledgement of awards, and the small gestures of colleagues became a framework within which I navigated, using calm observation and measured attention to ensure that I remained fully in command of my demeanor and the perception of those around me. Each microinteraction, each subtle movement, served to reinforce my understanding of the room, and I held my composure, projecting quiet strength, knowing that patience and discernment were the most powerful tools at my disposal in this carefully orchestrated environment. I sensed the subtle shift in energy as the ceremony moved into the segment highlighting individual contributions, and I maintained my calm, letting my presence convey quiet confidence without intrusion. The warm afternoon light streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished conference room, accentuating the gleam of the award plaques and certificates arranged neatly on the tables. I noticed the slight adjustments in Victoria's posture as she monitored the audience, the delicate angles of her smile, and the precise placement of her hands, all of which communicated an attempt at control without overtly disrupting the proceedings. I sat with my back straight and my hands folded neatly in my lap, aware of every glance, every whisper, and every subtle movement around me. The gentle hum of conversation, the soft shifting of programs, the faint clinking of glasses provided a backdrop that I could use to gauge the attentiveness and reactions of those present, understanding that the small cues were as meaningful as overt expressions. I reflected briefly on the years of guidance I had provided Daniel, the long evenings spent reviewing his projects, the patient mentorship that had prepared him for this moment, and I felt a quiet sense of accomplishment as I observed him receiving recognition for his efforts. Victoria's carefully measured gestures continued to draw attention, but I perceived the micro-tremors beneath her composed exterior, the slight tension around her eyes, the minute pauses in her expressions that revealed the effort required to sustain the impression she wished to convey. I allowed my awareness to sweep the room, noting the subtle reactions of colleagues and employees, the shifts in posture, the momentary exchanges of glances, each contributing to a map of social dynamics that I could read without being drawn into it. The warmth of the sunlight reinforced the clarity of my observation, and I remained attuned to the rhythm of the event, each applause, each soft murmur, and each turn of a program page providing data that I cataloged silently. I permitted myself to appreciate the contrast between the orchestrated presence of Victoria and the genuine reactions of those who recognized the quiet dignity I maintained, understanding that subtlety and restraint often carry more weight than overt confrontation. I straightened slightly, feeling the smooth fabric of my dress against my legs, and allowed the steady cadence of my breathing to anchor my focus. Every microinteraction, every whisper, every subtle movement around me reinforced the understanding that patience and careful observation could guide perception more effectively than any reactive gesture. As the ceremony continued, I noted the interactions among the attendees, the polite laughter, the subtle nods of acknowledgement, all while maintaining my composed presence and steady demeanor. I allowed my mind to organize the observations, preparing for moments when a well-timed, understated action could convey awareness and influence without raising attention unnecessarily. The polished surfaces reflected the shifting light, highlighting small details across the room, and I used them to maintain a continuous awareness of spatial and social dynamics. In this controlled state, I recognized that influence is often communicated through observation and measured responses, and I projected a quiet strength that was evident in my posture, my attentive gaze, and the calm rhythm of my movements. Each small gesture, every attentive glance, served to reinforce the perception of composure and authority, ensuring that the subtle provocations around me would be understood by others without my needing to engage overtly. The atmosphere of the room, punctuated by polite applause and soft chatter, created a consistent rhythm that I aligned with internally, allowing me to navigate the social complexities with precision, maintaining dignity and influence throughout the ongoing ceremony. I observed as the ceremony reached its final segment, the atmosphere thick with anticipation and the subtle energy of achievement, and I remained seated with measured calm, projecting the quiet authority I had cultivated over decades. The tall windows allowed streams of afternoon sunlight to spill across the polished floor, casting reflective highlights on the meticulously arranged tables and certificates, emphasizing the care and ceremony of the occasion. Victoria continued to move with careful precision, her gestures deliberate and her posture calculated to convey influence. Yet I noted the slight inconsistencies, the brief flickers of tension in her eyes, the micro-expressions that betrayed the effort to maintain control. I straightened my back, resting my hands lightly in my lap, allowing my awareness to encompass the room, every glance, every whisper, every subtle movement a piece of the social puzzle I was quietly observing. The gentle hum of conversations, the soft rustle of programs, the polite shifting of chairs created a rhythm that I aligned with internally, maintaining focus while observing the nuances of interaction. I reflected on the countless evenings spent guiding Daniel through early projects, the late nights reviewing reports and proposals, the patient mentorship that had helped him reach this stage, and a subtle sense of satisfaction accompanied my composed demeanor. The small details of Victoria's orchestrated presentation became increasingly apparent. The tilt of her head, the calculated placement of her hands, the timing of her glances toward colleagues, all contributing to an intended effect, yet I remained undisturbed, recording each observation mentally. I allowed my gaze to drift over the audience, noting the subtle shifts in attention, the barely perceptible signals of recognition or surprise, and I cataloged them without judgment, understanding that the power of perception often lies in what is silently acknowledged rather than overtly expressed. The sunlight shifted slowly, elongating shadows across the floor, reinforcing a sense of continuity and awareness, reminding me of the passage of time and the value of measured observation. I noted how the soft sounds of conversation, the rustle of programs, the polite coughs and murmurs served to underscore the social dynamics, providing context and subtle cues that guided my internal map of interactions. I allowed the awareness of these details to inform a quiet internal strategy, understanding how restraint, timing, and subtle gestures could communicate awareness and authority without the need for confrontation. Each small movement, every attentive glance, every micro-expression observed was integrated into a broader understanding of the room, a careful navigation of influence and perception that required no loud display of power. I adjusted my posture subtly, the soft fabric of my dress shifting against my legs, and I allowed my breathing to maintain a steady rhythm, reinforcing calm and clarity. The ceremony continued with a seamless flow, each acknowledgement and award adding layers to the room's social narrative, yet I remained anchored, observing the dynamics without interference, projecting a composed presence that contrasted with the calculated orchestration of Victoria's actions. I focused on the subtle contrasts between genuine recognition and performed gestures, allowing my perception to guide my understanding of influence and manipulation, knowing that patience and discernment often yield greater impact than immediate response. Every glance, every shift in posture, every ripple of reaction became part of the complex social map, and I remained seated, composed, quietly authoritative, allowing my calm observance to define the moment without confrontation or overt action. I felt the room shift as the ceremony began to wind down, the energy mellowing into the quiet satisfaction of accomplishments acknowledged and recognition given, and I remained seated with the same calm vigilance I had maintained throughout. The afternoon light had softened, casting elongated reflections across the polished floor and the gleaming surfaces of the award plaques and certificates, creating a subtle interplay of light and shadow that framed the room in gentle warmth. Victoria continued her careful navigation of the audience, her movements precise, every gesture calibrated to maintain attention and influence. Yet I noted the minor tensions beneath her carefully crafted composure, the fleeting micro-expressions that betrayed effort even in control. I adjusted my posture slightly, letting my shoulders relax while keeping my back straight, hands resting lightly in my lap, and I allowed my eyes to sweep across the room, capturing the interactions and subtle cues that spoke volumes about perception and intent. The soft rustle of programs, the gentle murmurs of conversation, the polite laughter, all blended into a rhythm that I attuned to, observing how attention shifted and how influence subtly manifested in each microinteraction. I reflected on the quiet guidance I had offered Daniel over the years, the late evenings spent reviewing his work, the patient advice given without fanfare, and I allowed a sense of quiet satisfaction to accompany my composed demeanor, knowing that these efforts had contributed to the achievements being celebrated. I watched Victoria closely, noting each deliberate movement, the tilt of her head, the slight adjustments in her posture, the calculated placement of her hands, and I cataloged these observations with a detached clarity, understanding that her attempts at control were both subtle and transparent to an attentive observer. The ambient sounds of the room, the shifting of chairs, the soft clatter of silverware, the occasional cough or clearing of a throat, provided a backdrop against which I could measure the reactions and attention of the audience, discerning patterns and social dynamics with care. I allowed the gentle warmth of the sunlight streaming through the windows to reinforce my awareness and focus, appreciating the way it illuminated the polished surfaces and highlighted the careful arrangements of the event. Every subtle expression, every slight movement, every whispered exchange became part of the broader understanding of the social landscape, and I remained seated, hands folded, posture poised, projecting calm authority and silent observation. I considered the power of restraint, of measured patience, understanding that composure alone could convey awareness and command respect without any overt statement or action. The ceremony unfolded steadily, each acknowledgement adding layers to the room's social narrative, and I maintained my steady presence, quietly authoritative, allowing the subtleties of my demeanor to influence perception naturally. I observed the contrasts between genuine recognition and the orchestrated displays of influence, noting the shifts in attention and the subtle acknowledgement of my calm presence by others. My breathing remained steady, my posture graceful, and I felt the reinforcing clarity that comes with deliberate observation and controlled response. The polished floors reflected the changing light, the subtle highlights guiding my attention to small details across the room, and I used each of these cues to maintain continuous awareness of the dynamics at play. I held my composure with quiet strength, projecting an unspoken authority, understanding that the patient observation I maintained would reveal truths more effectively than any immediate confrontation, and that the subtle provocations surrounding me would ultimately be illuminated through calm attentiveness, leaving a lasting impression of dignity and discernment. I remained seated as the ceremony approached its conclusion, the atmosphere softening into a gentle cadence of final acknowledgments and subdued applause. The sunlight had shifted lower, casting elongated reflections across the polished floors and the well-arranged tables, highlighting the subtle details of the awards and certificates that marked the accomplishments being honored. Victoria continued to move with deliberate precision, her posture perfect and her gestures calculated. Yet I noted the minute inconsistencies in her expressions, the brief flickers of effort beneath the composed exterior she projected. I straightened my back slightly, keeping my hands folded neatly in my lap, and allowed my eyes to traverse the room, capturing every glance, every subtle exchange, every micro-gesture that could convey intent or perception. The gentle rustle of programs, the soft murmurs, and the occasional polite laugh provided a rhythm against which I measured the attention and reactions of the audience, each detail informing my understanding of the social dynamics at play. I reflected on the years of guidance I had provided Daniel, the patient mentoring, the quiet support that had gone unrecognized yet had built the foundation for the success being celebrated, and I allowed a small, inward smile to accompany my composed presence. Victoria's movements continued to signal her attempts at influence, yet I could see the micro-tensions, the slight tightening of shoulders, the subtle shifts in eye contact, the fraction of a second hesitations, that betrayed the effort behind the performance. I let my awareness sweep over the room, noting the reactions of colleagues and employees, the small signs of recognition, the subtle acknowledgement of my quiet composure, and I cataloged each observation mentally, without interruption or reaction. The sunlight highlighted the texture of the tables, the shimmer of the plaques, the crisp folds of the programs, and I used these visual cues to maintain an ongoing spatial awareness, anchoring myself in the present while observing the currents of influence around me. Every minor movement, every glance, every whispered word became part of the larger understanding of social interplay, and I remained seated with an unshakable poise, allowing my calm and measured demeanor to project authority and awareness without the need for overt action. The rhythm of the room, the gentle shifts of attention, the soft sounds of polite conversation, the intermittent applause, provided a framework through which I maintained control of my perception and response. I adjusted my posture subtly, the smooth fabric of my dress brushing lightly against my legs, and focused on the clarity that patience and observation offered, knowing that subtle authority often speaks louder than immediate reaction. I observed the contrast between genuine recognition and calculated display, understanding how restraint and composure could reveal intent more effectively than confrontation. My hands remained folded, my fingers tracing the fabric of my dress lightly, and I continued to monitor the subtle social signals, noting how influence, perception, and reaction intertwined in the unfolding ceremony. The ambient light and soft sounds reinforced my focus and presence, reminding me of the strength inherent in steady observation and thoughtful restraint. I recognized fully that my quiet attention, measured posture, and calm demeanor would ultimately convey authority and dignity, allowing the underlying tensions to become evident to all without a word or gesture that would disrupt the composed balance of the room. As the final acknowledgments concluded, I remained seated, fully aware of the interplay between presentation and perception, maintaining my unshakable composure, and projecting a sense of quiet strength that would leave a lasting impression long after the ceremony ended.